Welcome to 1189, an online Bible commentary. My name is Tyler Marston, and today we're taking a look at Deuteronomy chapter 6. In the last chapter, Moses repeated the Ten Commandments, and he's giving this big speech about why Israel should follow God's law. And in this chapter, he'll talk about all the blessings and benefits associated with following him. Ultimately, he sums it all up into one command: love God with everything you have. And then he goes on to talk about how society would be better if everyone constantly went around trying to live up to God's standard. If every generation in Israel will be faithful and pass on these commandments and instructions to their children, it will ensure that they live in the promised land for a very long time, in a society that honors God. And ultimately, following God is for our own good, even today. Now this is the commandment, the statutes, and the judgments which the Lord your God has commanded me to teach you, that you might do them in the land that you are going over to possess it, so that you and your son and your grandson might fear the Lord your God, to keep all his statutes and his commandments which I command you all the days of your life, and that your days may be prolonged. O Israel, you should listen and be careful to do it, that it may be well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, just as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey. So Moses is saying that not only should the Israelites follow God here and now when they're about to take the promised land, but they should also continue to follow God's instructions in the future, whenever they've taken the promised land, and generations from now. It's not just about them keeping it, it's about their children keeping these commands, and their grandchildren keeping these commands, and their grandchildren's grandchildren. Moses says that God has promised, if they keep his word, they will be blessed. They're going to live in the land for a long time. They're going to multiply in it, just as God called all humans to do. And God says the land is going to flow with milk and honey, these symbols of rich, abundant blessings, just as God promised Moses back in Exodus 3. It's going to be a land that provides for their needs, just like the Garden of Eden. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. These words, which I am commanding you today, shall be on your heart. This is a very famous prayer in both Judaism and Christianity. Sometimes it's called the Shema, because Shema is the Hebrew word for hear or listen, and that's the first word in this verse. Famously, Jesus cited this prayer, the Shema, as the greatest commandment in the Old Testament, precisely because it's the basis for literally everything else. If we love God with everything we have, if we truly seek to honor him with every fiber of our being, then everything else is going to fall into place. It changes how we love our neighbors. It changes our goals in life. It changes our relationship to our family and our community. But again, just like with the Ten Commandments, notice that it starts not with what I do. It begins with a reminder of God's nature, of who he is. He is one, and he is the only one. It's only because of who he is that we can love him with everything we have. And if we keep these words constantly in our hearts and in our minds, then we will constantly be altering how we interact with the world around us in a way that pleases God. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Loving God is so important that Moses commands the Israelites to write these words everywhere they can. They need to talk about them while they're in their house with their families, but they also need to talk about it at work with their coworkers. It needs to be on their minds when they're lying down to sleep and when they're walking through the streets. We need to be reminded to love God with everything we have, everywhere, in all facets of our lives. Right? A lot of times we like to compartmentalize. We have our little God box, and we go to church on Sundays, and then we have our work box, and that's our work selves, and we have our home box, and that's our home selves. But that is just not how we're called to live as Christians. I mean, how we relate to God should literally change everything else about us. And so to keep ourselves in the routine of doing this, we might even have to set up physical, tangible reminders to enter God's presence. Maybe that looks like engraving the words onto the side of your house, or writing them down on a piece of paper and tying it to your hand. Or maybe in a little bit more modern context, it looks like a fridge magnet or a sticky note on your bathroom mirror. And why are these physical reminders so important? Then it shall come about, when the Lord your God brings you into the land which he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you, great and splendid cities which you did not build, and houses full of all the good things which you did not fill, and hewn cisterns which you did not dig, vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant, and you eat and are satisfied, then watch yourself, that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. It's definitely far from easy to obey God in the wilderness. I mean, we've seen that play out time and time again. But you really don't have a choice to depend on God or not if your only source of food is manna, miracle sky bread. But very soon, these people who we've seen are prone to rebellion, they're going to live in a rich land with all of the food and all of the water and all of the shelter they could possibly need. If they aren't literally waiting on God to provide every day like they have been doing, then there's a big chance they might forget everything that God has done for them in the past. And that could easily happen in one generation, much less over decades and centuries. And so Moses commands that the people not forget who they are. That's why those physical reminders were so important. They are a people in a covenant with the Creator God who loved them and freed them from slavery. If they can just remember constantly what God has done for them and for their ancestors, then it's going to be a whole lot easier to live with grateful hearts and love Him above everything else. You shall fear only the Lord your God, and you shall worship Him and swear by His name. You shall not follow other gods, any of the gods of the people who surround you. For the Lord your God in the midst of you is a jealous God. Otherwise the anger of the Lord your God will be kindled against you, and He will wipe you off the face of the earth. And Moses throws in a quick reminder to not only remember God, but also to not remember and to not worship any of the gods of their pagan neighbors. He's talked a lot about this already in Deuteronomy. But the point stands that if they come into the promised land and forget God, if they start living like the rest of the world, then their time in the land is not going to be long-lasting. And God is going to hand them over into judgment from their enemies. Just as right now, He's handing over the Amorites and Canaanites into the judgment of Israel's hands. You shall not put the Lord your God to the test, as you tested Him at Massah. You should diligently keep the commands of the Lord your God, and His testimonies and His statutes which He has commanded you. You shall do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may be well with you, and that you may go in and possess the good land which the Lord swore to give to your fathers, by driving out all your enemies from before you, as the Lord has spoken. Moses also is challenging the people to believe in God, not just to believe that He exists, but to believe that He's going to do what He said He was going to do. To think otherwise is to put God to the test. That's saying, God, if you're really there, then follow through on these promises like I expect them to be followed through on. And when we say things like that, we're putting ourselves in a position of authority over God, making Him answer to us. Moses says this is what the people did at Massah when God provided water from a rock in Exodus 17. The people were so anxious for water that they were questioning if God was really with them. They were actually ready to kill Moses and go back to Egypt if they didn't get what they wanted. And here, the people are challenged to do the opposite of that rebellion, to completely trust God and submit to His timing, especially when it comes to taking over the promised land. It's also of paramount importance that we trust God and that we submit to His timing. In fact, this is exactly what Jesus did when He was tempted by Satan. He used this verse and verse 13 from this chapter to resist the devil's advances. And so as long as the people follow God and trust Him, believing that He's going to do what He said He'd do, then they are going to live a long time in a good promised land with protection from their enemies. When your son asks you in time to come, saying, "What do the testimonies and the statutes and the judgments mean which the Lord our God commanded you?" then you shall say to your son, "We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Lord brought us from Egypt with a mighty hand. Moreover, the Lord showed great and distressing signs and wonders before our eyes against Egypt, Pharaoh and all his household. He brought us out from there in order to bring us in, to give us the land which he had sworn to our fathers." These verses are very reminiscent to God's word to the slaves in Exodus 12 and 13, talking about remembering the Passover. But here there's a little bit of an interesting twist. Remember that the generation of the slaves that were liberated on the night of Passover have all died. It's been 40 years since then. And now their children, who have grown up hearing about God's liberation, are instructed to pass on the same message to their children. God will continue to bless Israel and protect them in the promised land as long as they keep the covenant and keep passing these commands from generation to generation. But it only takes one generation messing up to completely break that chain. And so it is paramount that we do the same thing here, that we pass down Christ's instructions to our children. So the Lord commanded us to observe all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always, and for our survival, as it is today. It will be righteousness for us if we are careful to observe all this commandment before the Lord our God, just as he commanded us. At bottom, the reason Israel should follow these commands, and the reason we should follow God, is because it's for our good and for our survival. God is not some cosmic dictator laying down prohibitions arbitrarily. Following these laws and commands is genuinely the best way to live a long and happy and healthy life, especially in the era and culture that Moses is speaking in. And so for us as Christ followers, we're to see the logic behind these specific laws and apply them to our lives too. We are to love God with everything we have. We are to love our neighbor as ourselves. And if we're really doing that, it'll fall into place. And ultimately, Moses says that's how we find righteousness. That is, doing right by following God's commands. To wrap it all up, Moses says that if the people just follow God's commands, he will bless them. And all of it is summed up in verses 4 and 5. Loving God with all our heart, all our soul, and all our might. And then Moses says that constantly repeating these commands, both to themselves and to future generations, will create a lasting society that pleases God. Ergo, following God is for our good and for our survival. If we really believe that, then we need to act like it's true. Thanks for watching 1189. I hope that you have a good day, and God bless.